Hello, Mr. Levy. Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, you are an international spokesperson for the government of Israel at the very difficult times for your country, and not only because of the terrible terrorist attack of October 7th and the war, but also because of the controversial, I would say, international reaction to what is going on. You said a couple of weeks ago, quote, "Sometimes you really need to think outside the box." What do you do to make people, say, in Great Britain, change their minds, to understand Israel and to see the situation with your eyes?
Thank you. Well, we're working very hard in the aftermath of the October 7 massacre to remind the world why we are fighting this war. A war that we didn't want, a war we didn't start, a war we didn't expect, a war that Hamas launched on us with the October 7 massacre and the brutal and barbaric massacre and burning and beheading and rape of 1,200 Israelis and abduction of 250 people into the Gaza Strip. And we're fighting to bring those hostages home and to bring to justice the terror regime that is threatening to do that all over again. And so we're continuing to remind the world about the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th, triggering this war, and to keep telling the stories of the hostages who are still trapped in the Hamas terror dungeons. We're talking about ordinary people, our friends and family, men, women, children, the elderly, civilians and soldiers, held in the most inhumane conditions of physical, psychological, sexual abuse in the Hamas terror dungeons, and we're fighting to bring them all home.
I see, but the war is going on, and as I can see it, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, maybe you see it differently, but the focus from the October 7th massacre and, the terrorist attack, terrible terrorist attack, is somehow getting to the war in Gaza and the death of civilians there. And I can see the hundreds of posts in social media calling you personally and other speakers from the Israeli government the liars, that there were no beheaded babies, no rape, and, and that there is no understanding of the actions of Israeli government. What do you tell to yourself? Maybe there were some mistakes in this information war. Would you agree that there were some missteps from your side?
When the October 7th massacre happened, it triggered a wave of celebration and jubilation among anti-Semites all around the world. And then when the atrocities became clear, they shifted to denying it and then deflecting it and blaming Israel for it. Yes. The fact is that on October 7th, Hamas committed an act of genocide against the Israeli people. It sent in its death squads with a mission to murder as many Israelis as they could, as brutally and sadistically as they could. And we've shown the whole world evidence of what Hamas committed on October 7th, the way that it reduced whole families to the sort of human ash that we haven't seen since Auschwitz. And the media have been covering this consistently, continuing to add new stories, new investigations about the sexual atrocities of the Hamas rapist regime, about the acts of rape and gang rape and pedophilia and even necrophilia that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th in order to try to cow the Israeli people. And those investigations that international media have been carrying out are a reminder to the world of why we are fighting this war and why we are fighting to bring the Hamas rapist regime to justice.
I don't want to sound too critical to you, really, but I need to ask the question. So simultaneously with what you are saying right now, and simultaneously with all this, reports from Israel, with the stories of people who were just terribly, terribly murdered, we can see the stories of people who are suffering in Gaza. And there are critics all around the world who are saying that Israel needs to just stop bombing the Gaza Strip. So why is it impossible, in your opinion? Because you can see that there are waves of criticism, and there are people who do not get it. Why should this war go on when it can just stop?
First of all civilian casualties are a tragedy. They're a tragic feature of every war, and they're a tragic feature of this war, which Hamas started. We don't want people to be hurt. and everyone who's been hurt since October 7th would still be alive if Hamas had not waged this war, and if it were not fighting that war from densely populated areas, deliberately hiding under homes and hospitals. We want this war to end. But we need this war to end in a way that makes sure it can't erupt again. Because the first thing Hamas did after brutally massacring 1,200 people and abducting 250 was to threaten to do October 7 all over again. That is Hamas's whole reason for existing. It is a sick death cult that exists to advance jihad. And we cannot abandon our hostages in the Gaza Strip and leave the Hamas rapist regime in power. Because if that happens, Hamas is simply going to attack us again. We're going to find ourselves in a war again after it commits repeat atrocities. And so this time, the war with Hamas has to end with the destruction of the Hamas regime, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves in a cycle of violence. And we want to end the cycle of violence. And there's no way to do that while Hamas is still alive, on its feet, and able to fight.
How much time do you think you will need for that?
We think it'll take as long as it takes. The head of the Israeli army has said he expects the fighting to last all year. Not with the same intensity that we have seen so far. We're shifting to a different stage in the operations that are going to see more targeted raids and special forces. But, you know, the fact is that Hamas has spent the last 16 years deliberately hiding its military infrastructure under homes, schools, and hospitals. Of the 1,500 terror tunnel shafts we have found, basically all of them were inside mosques and homes and hospitals. Hamas designed the whole Gaza Strip for the sake of its human shield strategy, to try to make it impossible for Israel to reach its terrorists without going through civilians. And that's why we have been trying to urge civilians to get out of harm's way so that we can go after the monsters who perpetrated the October 7 massacres and are threatening to do it all over again. And Hamas is trying to make that very difficult, and we're trying to thwart that human shield strategy. And you know, this war can end tomorrow. This war can end tomorrow if Hamas surrenders now.
Absolutely.
And its terrorists know that they have two choices: surrender now, peacefully, or die in battle. And we hope that more of them are going to surrender.
But still, right now, you're being accused, Israel has been accused in actually bombing the places where the civilians are, where the civilians were told to hide from this war. And there's been hearing in International Court of Justice initiated by South Africa. You have commented on this issue. I've seen it. Why do you think that South Africa is the one who actually reached the court and accusing you guys in genocide?
You know, on October 7th, Hamas committed an act of genocide against us, and South Africa is no stranger to covering up for genocides. It was South Africa that took the side of Omar al-Bashir, the butcher of Sudan, when he was indicted at the International Criminal Court for genocide. And we think it is outrageous that South Africa has chosen to play advocate for the devil and to make itself criminally complicit with the Hamas rapist regime by giving it political and military cover for the atrocities it perpetrated on October 7. The fact is that since the beginning of the ground offensive, we have been urging civilians in Gaza to go to a designated humanitarian zone. And we've been urging them to go there because that is one of the only places in Gaza where Hamas is not already hiding. And we think it is shameful that the United Nations, instead of cooperating with our efforts to keep civilians safe, has been herding them into Hamas strongholds, has been denying that Hamas built military bases inside hospitals, and they have made themselves complicit with its human shield strategy. And we see international organizations, instead of doing their job, deflecting blame onto Israel to cover up the fact that they are covering up for Hamas. And we are demanding global accountability from the international officials who are covering up for Hamas and are complicit with the Hamas human shield strategy and abuse of the civilian population in Gaza by the Hamas rapist regime.
What do you think your chances are in this International Court of Justice?
We think their chances are zero if the International Court of Justice is truly a court of justice. It will see that it was the Hamas terror regime that perpetrated brutal acts of genocide on October 7th. And it will see that Israel has gone further than any army in the history of warfare to try to get civilians out of harm's way and to minimize civilian casualties, despite Hamas's despicable and evil attempts to maximize civilian casualties, because it thinks it will get it pity points around the world, and that will generate diplomatic pressure to get Israel to stop. But we know we're fighting a just war to bring back the hostages trapped in the Hamas terror tunnels, and a just war to make sure that the Hamas rapist regime can never abuse our people like it did on October 7th ever again.
I have started this conversation with your role as an international spokesperson, and you had this incident. I just cannot avoid mentioning it. This incident with the Sky News anchor who was asking you obviously ridiculous questions. I don't want to sound biased, but I mean, this is an obvious reality. So after that, you became a TikTok star and social media star. How do you feel about that? And what this is true, right? So what do you think about that? How do you feel about that episode?
Definitely a strange incident with Sky News to be asked such a strange question. For your viewers who haven't seen it, it was a question about whether the fact Israel is willing to release 3 prisoners for every hostage we get out means that we attach less value to Palestinian lives, which is, of course, a crazy allegation. And that went viral in Israel because it touched a nerve for a lot of Israelis. A certain feeling in the country that sometimes it doesn't matter what we do and how moral we are, there will be people who will always twist it against us. And since then, I've seen my social media following skyrocket, and we are using that to try to tell Israel's story and spread Israel's message about why we're fighting this war, about how we're trying to get back the hostages, and to use that, including through content that we're generating, especially for social media, to speak to people who aren't sitting and watching television news shows like your own.
Yeah, but the whole world saw our eyebrows. They call it an eyebrows incident. The final question is, do you think there is an explanation for this wave of pro-Palestinian protests, for this amount of people, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, who do not want to listen to people like you? You call it an anti-Semitism. Do you have a reason? I mean, why is this happening?
It is anti-Semitism, I'm afraid. When you see people tearing down posters of vulnerable hostages, including little children, it is because they have completely dehumanized Israelis, and it's because they have completely dehumanized Jews. Let's remember the protests that we saw around the world didn't start with Israel's offensive after the October 7 massacre. They started with the October 7 massacre itself, which gave encouragement and excitement to millions of people around the world who think that the state of Israel has no right to exist and would gladly see us dead. And part of our fight is not only to fight against Hamas, but to show the world the extent of the problem they have on their streets, when they have people calling for an intifada, which is nothing other than a call for violent terrorism and political violence against Jews and against Israelis.
Yeah. Final quick thing. Have Sky News team, people, representatives reached you out maybe for a follow-up? Was there an attempt to talk to you again?
No, and Mrs. Burley has not invited me back on her show since then.
Okay, but I really hope that we will
come back if the invitation is extended.
Okay, but our invitation will be there. I'm sure. With
pleasure.
I hope to see you again on tvrain. Thank you very much.
With pleasure. Thank you.